So I'm going to put this up in a video now. If you want to go over to the website, the link will be in the description, unknownperformance.co.uk. Go on there, just click on shop and you'll find these in. So I've got large, got medium, got XL, even got a couple of double XL. I've been wearing these for the last 6 months or so. You might have seen it in some videos. Obviously I've got hoodies as well, but these are t-shirts for the summer. The quality of these is great. So the transfer that's on it doesn't come off, doesn't peel, doesn't disintegrate, as long as you take the care warning. So read this care warning once you get the t-shirts through. So at the minute we're just going for the black because the black shows up the logo really lovely, and I like black, goes with anything. But in the future we're going to go for greys, blues, whatever. I'm going to get some hoodies in as well for the autumn time, but at the minute we're just going to be selling the t-shirts, and then we'll be expanding the range. If you want to support the channel, I really appreciate it. So welcome back to another episode, and this episode is going to be about the Z20LET and the Z20LEH engine. Now you might remember that I removed this engine from the SRI Turbo. This is the engine that come out of it. It's a fully forged engine. It's got a bit of piston slap, so it's got forged pistons, steel rods, a stock LET crank. So this is an Z20LET engine, and I'm going to show you the differences between the two. So I've got some Z20LET blocks. You can see this is a LET. You can see there, and I've got some Z20LEH blocks and heads and all sorts. So I'm just going to show you the differences. I'm going to strip this one down so you can see, and we can have a look inside the engine and see why it was piston slapping. So this engine's been modified a little bit from a stock LET engine. So it's got a balancer shaft deleting it at the minute, as you're going to see from the sump. There's no balancer shafts in there, which is great. You know, anytime you're doing a rebuild, you don't want to have the balancer shafts pop back in. You've got to reshim and all sorts. See some comments about stock pulleys lately on the on the Facebook. It makes you laugh because they don't have a clue what they're talking about. So you can see this has got a stock flywheel in it at the minute. We've run line flywheels with a twin plate clutch. Heavy. I mean, you can imagine the amount of pressure that's going on a twin plate clutch with a light flywheel. No balancers in the crank, no balancers, so it's been balancer deleted, and then like an R&D lightweight pulley on here, 2.6 bar boost. After a year the engine was stripped down and there was no bearing wear. It makes you laugh when people with no knowledge of building these engines, just what they've read on the internet, and they come out with stupid comments about how it's going to destroy your engine, when I tell you it ain't. Unless you're talking about 150,000 miler engine that's going to go bang at any time anyway. Things first, we're going to get this up in the air, so we're going to have to get an engine crane on this and then put it onto the engine stand. So first thing I've got to do is get this flywheel and clutch off. I think it's a Z20LET clutch on there. I haven't checked yet. When I pull it off, I have a check, because it's on the ground at the minute. It's a very heavy item, as you know. So I'll get up in the engine crane, get on the engine stand, and we can start tearing it apart. Right, so first off, we're just going to blast off these clutch bolts. So these are just 11mm clutch bolts on here. Get that off, you can pull the cover plate off. Once you get the clutch off, you can get to the flywheel. Very simple. So before I can get this engine stand mounting on, I want to take off the oil cooler exchanger. So you can see I can't really get to under here with the mount. Now these are a very clever design on the Z20LET. You can see it's a water cooled oil cooler. So basically in the winter this warms up your oil nicely, warms it up quickly so you don't damage your engine. You know, your oil gets up to nice viscosity, because in the winter obviously the oil's very thick to start off with, and it's like syrup, and then this warms it up nice and quickly because the water warms up quicker than the oil. But also it's a thermostatically controlled unit. So inside here there's a thermostat, just like there is in your water system, and the best way to use these, if you've got a high performance engine, is to run the pipework going to an air to oil cooler and then have it thermostatically controlled. So when the oil does actually get too hot, it will then go into the air to oil cooler, and then you've got the best of both worlds. So in the winter you've got your oil warming up nicely with the water, and that's how it perfectly. So a lot of people delete these on full track cars. That's absolutely fine when you're warming them up or whatever, but if you're going to start them up from cold in the winter, you always want to keep this on the back of it, so don't delete it. So there it is, the engine's on the engine stand. You can see I've just bolted it all up, so it's time to start tearing this apart. So the engine had a XEV cam on it as well, you can see here. So we're going to obviously going to start tearing it down from the top end first, and then I'll show you the differences between the Z20LET, which is this block that we've got here, and then the Z20LEH. I mean, I've got a couple of spare blocks. There's one there, and the crankshaft differences as well, which is here. This is an LEH crankshaft. You'll see that this is slightly different to LET, because the LET has a drive gear for the balancer shafts, which is the LEH doesn't. So as you can see here, we've got the vernier pulley on the inlet side. That means that this car's got an inlet cam on it. So you can see it's got an XEV inlet cam from the normally aspirated cars. Just by looking at them, you can normally tell the differences anyway, because you can see the Z20LET exhaust cam is a little bit more rounded on the lobe for a little bit more duration. You can see here it's a little bit higher lift on the inlet cam with a pointed lobe on the top. Now you have to dial these in as well, half a tooth, which is about 7 degrees, to get these timed up properly in retard. That's just to stop the overlap on the inlet and exhaust cam. So you can see we're going to pull these out now. These caps only get done up to 8 Newton meters. Don't do them any more than that. Don't bolt them down, you know, torque them up 8 Newton meters. I know it ain't a lot, but that's all they need because they're only aluminium caps on them. So as you just see, I just removed the cams, and I just wanted to show you these cam caps because they're all numbered. So you can see here on the cams caps itself, you see there's a dot and there's a 2. So you can see that's 2, that's 3, that's 4, that's 5. These all have to be in order, but luckily on the head you also have the numbers as well. So you see 2, 3, 4, 5, and they all got to be in order. So the dots always face towards the exhaust side. So you can see 8, 9, obviously 9 can get confused with 6, you know, you could have 6 going that way, but the dot has always got to be at the bottom, so you know that's number 9. These have to be in order because they have to be matched to the head. You can see number 0 is 10, and you see the dots on the end. Makes it very simple to do. So obviously you can't really confuse 9 and 6 because that's the end can cap anyway, but that's how you can tell. The dots always go on the exhaust side. Make sure you get these in order, it's very important. So it's time to get this head off, and all we're going to do is we're going to undo these head bolts because they're not ARPs, they're just stock head bolts on this. So what you want is a T55 Torx, and that undoes them perfectly. What we're going to do is we're going to crack off the bolts from that outside inwards. So we're going to start from each corner and work our way in, a complete opposite of when you're doing the head up, and that's to stop the head warping. Never gun these bolts off either. That's the worst thing you can do. You can strip the head bolts out of the block, you can snap head bolts even, and if you don't do these in sequence like I just said, you can warp the head because there's a ton of pressure obviously on these heads, and you can end up warping them, and then when you go back to put them back together, and then your head gasket's not going to seal properly. So we're going to crack these off now. So now the head is literally ready to come off, easy as that. So just rock it backwards and forwards, and you can see literally just pops off like so. And you can see you've got the locating lugs, which are here. These normally get tight if they're not done properly. But the head is off. You can see it's had a skim. So you can see here how little wear that the engine has done since its last rebuild. You can see the pistons are very clean still. Obviously these are false pistons on here. You've got a little bit of carbon build up in the middle, which is totally normal. But yeah, it hasn't done many miles at all. You see how clean they are. Just a little tip, Vxr Ryan supply the head gaskets for the GM head gasket sets, so just use a Vxr Ryan's one as a stock one. You can see this has got Vxr Ryan's one on it. Whenever I get the GM head gasket sets now, they've all got Vxr Ryan gaskets on them. So what we're looking at now is excessive play in these bores. Now I can tell straight away these wear marks in these bores. Now this bore was honed when it was built and it hasn't done no mileage at all, but if you can see here, there is wear marks up here. Try and focus in. There's actually wear marks from the piston skirt already up this bore. That just tells me that these pistons are too slack. Now you're always going to have piston movement inside the bore, so this type of piston movement, this little bit of movement here, is absolutely fine, but I can tell from this one, you're probably about to hear it, that is way too much. So let's try and do this one-handed. I can tell that the clearances there is way too much, so this is probably the bore that was causing the piston slap. Obviously we'll do to piston to wall clearance measurements when we spin the engine upside down and start taking it apart, but the bores are all good, so this is a good block to be using still. If I wanted to oversize it or whatever, I'll check the bores out, measure them up with a bore dial gauge and see if they're any good. But but we've got to take this stuff out of here. So we've obviously got forged piston steel rods. You'll seal that when it's apart. Right, so as I've got boxes and boxes of different engines stripped down at the minute, I'm going to show you the difference between some parts on the Z20LEH and the Z20LET, just so you know. They're really irrelevant parts, really. It's like silly things like this one. So this is the oil feed for the turbo. So it obviously goes on the back of the block, just like you're seeing there. But on the Z20LET, it bolts to the block there. On the Z20LEH, it bolts to the sump. You can see the brackets are slightly different. Does exactly the same thing, so it's not going to matter at all which one you use, but just little differences like that they chose in later models. So as another one as well that you might probably know, Z20LEHs don't come with a balancer shaft, they come with a dual mass flywheel. Now on the LETs we normally switch over to these balancer shaft deletes, which is off the LEH engine. Now to change them you need this baffle, you need the actual oil pickup pipe, which is different to the LET one, and you need this girdle. This is a block girdle. Now on the higher end, higher power Z20LETs, these are brilliant to use. Now I've used these at massive power. I know they're making billet ones at the minute, but these ones are really good anyway. They're really strong. You can see they're made of cast steel and they're very heavy, and they stop the bearing bridges moving apart at really high boost pressures. So if you're going to end up putting as a very high powered LET, you want to have this balancer shaft delete. Don't worry about what people say about harmonic balancers and all that lot. I know they have got their place, but I've proven that these engines can last thousands and thousands of miles at massive power with dual mass flywheel deletes, balancer shaft deletes, light and pulleys, twin plate clutches, and you know, it's the internet rumours just ridiculous. So into the Z20LEH sump, there's nothing different about the sump itself, but the oil level sensor is different, and the only difference is this plug connection. It's a square connection on the LET, where it's this like rounded ovals type connection on the LEH. It just means that if you was to run this sensor, you'd have to change the plug over to an LEH plug. So you can see here that one's oval like that, and you can see that's the Z20LET one, which is square. Also another thing, the pickup pipe on the balancer shaft delete, you can see that they're different. So you've got the Z20LET and the Z20LEH side by side, and you can see they're longer brackets and the shorter brackets, so you can't interchange them two when you're doing the balancer shaft deletes. 20LEH pumps, this is what this one is, and actually cosmetically, as you can see, there is no difference between that and the Z20LET. The only difference is the LEH has a lower oil pressure, as the Z20LET has a higher oil pressure, which is why when you fit the Vxr turbos to the Z20LETs, because they have the higher pressure oil pump, they will blow the seals out very quickly. That's why you have to use a restrictor bolt. I don't care what people say, I always use restrictor bolts and I never ever have a problem. If you don't use a restrictor bolt, you're going to blow it out very quickly because the oil pressure is so much higher. If you don't believe me, go and do it to your car, and within like 1,000 miles your turbo will be done. So when it comes to the Z20LET and the Z20LEH valves, they're actually exactly the same. So you can see the bigger ones here, these are the inlet valves. They're exactly the same between the two, and so are the exhaust valves. But the turbo and the NA varieties are completely different. So these are the exhaust valves on these cars. Now these are sodium filled. If you damage your head on a Vxr or a Z20LET GSI, never ever go out and buy aftermarket exhaust valves. If you bend them, you've got to get the sodium filled valves. If you don't, you're going to burn them out very quickly. The normally aspirated valves just can't take the extra heat that the turbochargers produce. Now I have bags and bags and bags of valves. You can see these are even like, this is about 1% of the valves I've got. Now the reason I keep the second-hand valves, the exhaust valves, not so much the inlet valves, because you can actually just buy them off the shelf, but the exhaust valves are obviously sodium filled, like I just said. Do not change these. I see it so much. They go out and buy like brand new valves thinking they're doing the right thing. You have to buy turbo valves. So if you can't get the standard valves, the sodium filled ones, and refurb them yourself, go out and get like Supertech or Ferreira, you know, or REC valves and one-piece stainless or mnemonic. They've got to be mnemonic at least in conal valves. If they ain't, you're going to damage them. And with the aftermarket valves, you can see they go to a one-piece design. The stock valves are a three-piece. These are for longevity. When you go to a one-piece valve, it's less longevity, but it stops the valve spinning inside the head. So there's also differences between the alternators as well. So the Z20LET alternator is on the left here, and the bracket's different, the alternator's different itself. They are interchangeable, as in you can make them work on both cars, but you have to change a lot of stuff. See, the loom on the LEH is different as well. You can see it got a different type of plug system, a different type of battery connections, and also this bracket has the different offsets. So I'm going to pull this bracket off quickly. The other side of it is, you see this pulley is longer on this side. This is the LET, this is the LEH, but the LEH alternator actually produces a lot more amperage than the LET, so it is actually a good upgrade as well, but you just have to swap over a few different components. You can see there's a threaded connection in the end of here, where there's like a nut connection in the end of this one, and I'll just pull these brackets off so you can see the different offsets. So both brackets are off, LET on the left, LEH on the right. You can clearly see they're a completely different offset, so you can't interchange the two between the alternators. You've got to completely change the whole package. Right, so now onto the block itself. Luckily I've got a few of these laying around. This is a Z20LEH block, you can see there. And the biggest difference itself is in the main caps and the fact that it runs oil squirt. So you can see here on the main caps on the LET, which you'll see when I undo that block, these have grub screws in the LET, whereas they're blanked off in the LEH because obviously they run the balancer shaft elite because they have a dual mass flywheel. The biggest difference you can see up here is the fact that the LEH runs oil squirters. Now that's a piston to oil squirter, and it provides high pressure oil going up to the piston skirt and cooling down the piston. Obviously the piston is at a really high temperature, much higher than the oil is, and that oil actually cools down the piston itself. You might not think it, even though the oil is red hot, it does, and that gives you a much higher depth threshold on the piston, allows you to run much higher boost and much more heat than you would be able to without an oil squirter in it. Now you can run high power engines without the oil squirters, but you're going to be able to run much higher heat inside the chambers than you will with an oil squirter. Now what we do on the LETs, because you can't get hold of these LEH squirters anymore from Vauxhall, we actually run BMW oil squirters in the main bearing itself that squirts up to the piston. But that's a much better design, that one there. So if you go for an LEH block, get it wedged. That's my recommendation for the higher powered cars. They do say that the blocks itself are made out of different materials. Not all of them are. The early blocks were. They was made in Brazil and made out of a much better material itself. So if you can find a Z20LET block that was made in Brazil, and it's going to be like what the BTC cars used and the Chevrolets and the Opels, etc. A lot of people go on about, you know, the blocks itself. You can see they're semi-open deck. Don't think they're actually an open deck. And a Honda is an open deck, a Subaru is an open deck, where it's literally got cooling all the way around and the cylinder is not supported by anything. These are actually a semi-open deck block, which is similar to the semi-open deck on the Subarus. You can see here what we do on the higher power engines is we wedge these, which basically just puts a cylinder support in here to stop these cracking. At really high cylinder pressures, these do crack out into the waterways. A lot of people go on about using the C20XE block or the the XEV block, the early ones. Now the XEV block, the early XEV blocks were basically just remachined C20XE blocks. So don't think you're going to be getting anything special there. Just get yourself an XE block if you want to do it that way. I never do it that way because there's, I just like to use a newer block, the one that ain't been through a ton of stress. So I always just wedge them. We've tested these wedges to really stupid power and never had one crack. So that's why I always use them. Now onto pistons itself. So the biggest difference between the two is the LEH, which is this one, runs a semi-forged piston. It's still cast, but it's forged. Now the LET runs an unforged piston. It's a cast piston. It's still quite strong, but it's no good for over 300 horsepower. Another big difference is you see that the skirts on these are Nickel coated on the LEH pistons, and they're made by Marla, which both of them actually are made by Marla. But you can see in there 86p is how you tell the difference. You can see here that the Z20LET piston is actually uncoated. Now Marla is only one of the biggest companies that can produce Nickel coated pistons. You can see there that they produce a much better friction in the bore. When you run an uncoated skirt, you can end up getting a lot more wear than you do if you don't run the proper clearances. So the forged pistons are brilliant. The actual rods itself are the same. This is an LEH rod and this is an LET rod. Identical rods, they take the same amount of power. That's why if you change the rods on the LEH engine, you can run up to 500 horsepower depending on, like, cylinder pressures, etc. I wouldn't really want to be running no more than like 450 on a unwedged block, unless you're running a massive turbo that has a low cylinder pressure. Now you can see in here we've had a valve to piston contact. Actually it's fine to still run them, but I wouldn't, because you can get heat spots where the actual piston has got damage in it. You can see on here, these are depth marks. If you ever want to know what a depth mark looks like, that's what a depth mark looks like. Now, the amount of times I see on the internet that people blame this on stuff getting into the cylinder, when they don't actually know what they're talking about. They are actually depth marks. You can see here, there's nothing actually got into the cylinder. That's not damaged from that. What happens is on the LET piston is you get a cracked ringland, which means this part in the middle here actually breaks away. I did have a piston with one on it, but I've actually thrown it in the bin. Otherwise I could have shown you that. A bit of this piston actually breaks away. So both of these pistons are an 8 to 8 to 1 compression, which is quite high for a turbocharged engine. And these air pistons here, even though they're semi-forged, they're a much better option when you're running like a KO6 setup, because you're going to make more power at lower boost pressures because of obviously the higher compression. You know what happens in an engine with compression ratios, 8 to 8 to 1. And also these are a lot lighter. When you weigh them, they're a lot lighter than like a billet forged piston. Any pistons off the market, most of them, and I'm not saying all of them because you can get Wiseco ones in 8 to 8 to 1, most of them are 8 to 5 to 1. The go-to piston that I use is an Amiga piston, and they're 8 to 5 to 1. Now you can run a lot more boost with them, but you'll make a lot less power. So if you're running, say, a forged engine with an 8 to 5 to 1 compression, you're going to make less power at the same boost than you are an 8 to 8 to 1 compression. But when you're going to really high boost pressures, you do want to drop the compression ratio a little bit, which is why we run them. But say you're just running a KO6 setup, the 8 to 8 to 1 Z20LEH pistons are the better pistons. So a little bit about the turbochargers. So a lot of people think that the Z20LET turbocharger is actually a KO3, but it's not. They're both KO4 turbos. KO3 comes on the course of Vxr. The only difference between the LET and the LEH actual turbo itself is the LET and the LEH share the same size exhaust wheel, but the LEH actually has a bigger compressor wheel, which is why you can run higher boost pressures. And then obviously when you go to a KO6, they go bigger. The issue is there, you get a bottleneck at this exhaust wheel itself. You start operating this exhaust wheel with a KO6 setup like some of the manufacturers are doing now, you unleash a lot more power, like 40 to 50 more horsepower just from getting that back pressure out of that turbo. And you can see on the back of these turbos they don't have a closed back design, which allows that oil seal to burn out, which this one has very quickly, because there's no protection at the back here. Even though you've got this heat shield, it still gets way too hot. Also inside here, the bearings are not strong enough to be able to cope with the boost pressures that we run, like over 20 psi. They only was designed, and you can see on here on the LEH that they designed a oil restrictor bolt in the later cores into here because they knew they was fitting them into the LET engines. So what they done is they fitted a restrictor in there anyway, but I still, even with that, I still fit a restrictor again, just to make sure that it's good oil pressures in there. Otherwise you're going to end up blowing them seals out, like I said. And while we're on the turbo subject, as I showed you before, with the KO6 setup, they just keep putting bigger and bigger compressor wheels on it and not uprating anything else. As you see with this Turbodynamics one, is absolute trash, and they charged over £1,000 for this unit. Absolutely ridiculous. And all they've done is put a billet wheel on the end, no uprated bearings or anything. But the problem is you keep putting bigger and bigger wheels on it. So obviously now you've got the same size wheel as an LET, then you've gone to the Vxr, the KO49, which is slightly bigger. Now you've gone to a KO6, which is even bigger, and you've not uprated this exhaust wheel, and it just creates massive back pressure. And that's how you can get detonation inside the cylinder, because you get reversion up cylinder 3. I'll show you why that is right now, actually. So inside here, this is a massively ported manifold, and if you ain't heard of reversion before, you'll understand if you go and look it up. Basically, you see the manifold design of this. You've got the longer runner on number 1 and number 4. They're quite long. Then you've got 2 and 3, which are quite close together. But if you look at number 3, it's the shortest runner. So the air always takes the least resistance. When this back pressure inside this manifold gets so high, because you're just pushing so much exhaust gas into it, and it actually can't get out of the downpipe when you've got like a 2.5 inch exhaust and a stock exhaust wheel, it's going to start pushing cylinder pressure back up into number 3. And all that's going to happen is that's going to contaminate the supply inside the piston. That's why you get detonation. And that's why you end up with, if you're going to blow a piston up, it's always going to be number 3 on a stock manifold. So as many people will know, the Z20LET runs the 70mm airflow sensor. As you can see here, this is the 70mm and this is the 80mm. There's clearly a massive difference there. You can see just visually, obviously it's 10mm difference, and these need to be calibrated in the map to allow the ECU to know the extra airflow that's going on inside the engine. So these are the Vxr fuel injectors that come on the Z20LEH, and these are 470cc injectors at 3 bar fuel pressure. So the Z20LEH comes with a 3 bar fuel pressure regulator, the Z20LETs comes with a 3.3 bar fuel pressure regulator, and the Z20LET have a smaller black injector, whereas these are blue on the Vxr. So when you go into stage 3.5, these are the upgrades that you have. So you just go with the 80mm MAF sensor and the Vxr injector, which you will see on the Zafira in the future. So you can see what I mean about the balancer shaft delete. You can see the baffle plate. This is all brand new. Got it from GM. And also this engine was supplied with my fixing kit. The person who bought it bought my fixing kit off me. You can see we uprate all these bolts here to 12.9 tensile. If you're interested in that kit, just drop me a message. We also do it with the main caps as well. Just about seeing there. The main cap bolts all uprated as well to 12.9 tensile, just to stop everything moving around and strengthen up that bottom end. So as you can see here, these are the normal main cap bolts and they're a slightly less tensile strength. So you can see if I wipe it down quickly for you, that these are a 10.9 tensile strength, which is just about see there. So a little bit of added extra strength as well, and they're a cap end bolt, so they fit lovely on there. So now we're balancer shaft and the sump and everything's off. You can see we've got steel rods in here. You see we've got ARP 2000 bolts in there as well. Just wanted to show you while I was here about the main caps. So you can see this is an LEH main cap, and that's the LET main cap. You see these have been blanked off in the casting marks on the LEH, and basically this is where the oil supply was supplied to the balancer shafts. And you can see on the crankshaft here, this is the gear that supports that balancer shaft, as opposed to, if I show you the Z20LEH one, doesn't have that at all. So you can see it's not on here at all. Now a lot of people say that the LET crankshaft's stronger because of that. I don't believe that at all, because I've never seen one of these crankshafts on an LEH or an LET or a Z20LET snap between 700 horsepower. You know, these blocks do come apart more than the crank does, and that's mainly because of the block girdle not supporting these bearing caps. As you see, the balancer shafts bolt to the bearing caps, which is here, 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 and that supports the whole lot. So if you are going to go to a massive boost engine, it would be worth going to that billet cap, but it is a lot of money. The LEH cap I've tested to a massive power and it's been fine so far. So I'm not going to blast this whole engine apart right now, like take the crankshaft out, because as you see I've got too many blocks and crankshafts laying around. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out a rod and a piston, just to show you like what we're running, what bearings are in there, and I'll show you the bores and a little bit of wear to tell you what the piston slap is. I can't really do any measurements at the minute because I can't get the feeler gauges down there with a crank in, but I need to keep this engine complete so I can move it around at the minute, and then when I strip it apart. So you can see there clearly we've got the 12.9 tensile bolts that I always run on these higher power engines, just holding it all together. It's really important at this power level to try and hold the thing together. So let's get one of these rods out. Right, so as you just see, just pulled that piston out of there. The piston's in really good condition itself. It's just basically down to the bore having too much tolerance in it. Obviously it's a Z20LET block and it was just honed. It wasn't rebored for these pistons. Probably can't see right in there, but there's the Marla 86P mark. And obviously we've got a set of steel rods there that are in really good condition. I've just pulled the bearings out of the rod cap, and everything looks like brand new, because as you know that this has done no mileage at all, which is a real shame because it was put together real nice. If it wasn't for the bores itself, this would have been a good running engine. So these rings are all brand new Marla rings, and the engine would have been good. So we can put this together. We'll be able to build a nice good engine out of this. Just got to be done properly. The crank's really good. You can see here, probably have to go overboard, but we're going to change the block anyway, so we'll put a different block in there. It'll be a Z20LEH block with this setup in it, and we'll build that up, make a nice strong engine for it for another car. Yeah, this is a telltale sign that the clearances were no good on the piston to wall clearance, especially on the skirt. So you can see just about the wear. This has obviously been honed. You can see it was honed during the rebuild. You can see how quickly that worn, and that was down to that piston having too much movement inside the cylinder, and that was what with the noise that we was hearing with the piston slap that would never go away, because these pistons don't expand like a proper forged piston wheel. They're designed at different tolerances. So you can see that is a clear sign that the piston slap problem we're having. And then another issue as well on the skirt, you can see the Nickel liner had started to wear away a little bit. and that was a prime, exactly what we was talking about with the noise inside the engine. But the LET head that I just pulled off, it's actually in really nice condition. It can go again pretty much straight away. I know it had a straight rebuild, you know, when the block was built, so the head won't need to be touched at all. You see all the valves and everything were cleaned up, and they've got no carbon deposits on them at all, and so you can see how like little wear this engine has done since the rebuild. Just a shame about the piston slat. As you say, it's like nicely skimmed, so that's perfect to be run again. This is the LET head, and as I said to you on the other episode, the LET runs this barbed fit into the water cooling of the throttle body, and on the LEH this is blanked off in the casting mark. Now you can, this is a 1/8 MPT fitting, so you can just get a blank that goes in there. I just like it to like look a little bit smarter and use the LEH blanking water jet on the back, but as opposed to everything else, there are identical heads between the LET and the LEH. You see the EGR has been blanked off from the XEV engine. The casting's all the same. You can see inside here it's nice and clean. It had brand new lifters pot in here. These lifters in the engine were brand new, as you can see how clean they are. There's no wear or anything on them. That's stiff to get out of the bore. But these ain't inner lifters. They were supposed to be inner lifters, but they're not. They're clearly a pattern part lifter, which I do not use on these cars, which is a shame because they come in an inner box, but obviously the manufacturers decided to change them over. You can see here that the head is lovely and clean, so this head's going to be wrapped up and ready to go. I'll give it a quick clean up and it can go back on an engine. There's no problems with this. I just clean out the bores, get all that carbon deposits out of there, and this can be slapped back on the engine. So yeah, this will probably go on the engine that I rebuild for the car. Obviously I'll just check the thickness of the head. Looks like it's only had one skim from factory, which is this one, so it'd be nice and straight for a multi-layer steel head gasket. It was just the fact that there was Z20LET block with a Z20LEH piston, and it wasn't rebored for that, or it wasn't oversized or anything, and the piston to wall clearances wasn't measured properly. They was just slapped in there, and that's what can happen. Obviously the compression was good, but you heard the noise when you heard it starting up on the other car. So I hope you have enjoyed this episode of the teardown of between the LET and the LEH engine. If you want to add anything, just drop it in the comments section. Anything I forgot, because there's loads of stuff. I'm not interested in the actual like engine bay where the ECU sits on the inlet or anything like that. Just the engine itself, and if it's valuable to people, I will heart that so that we can actually see it. Hopefully this will be a comprehensive guide for people to be able to tell the differences between the two. A lot of people do know it already.